NBC10 at issue.
NBC10 at issue, the planned mosque for Lower Manhattan, expression of freedom or an affront to 9/11 victims. Freedom of religion has nastily collided with politics, war, deep wounds, and some say prejudice. The Manhattan Mosque controversy, now on NBC10 at issue. Good morning. I'm Steve Highsmith. The issue of whether to allow the Islamic Community Center and Mosque 4 blocks from Ground Zero is being debated on many levels: legal, constitutional, political, philosophical, religious, emotional, personal. With me now are 3 guests with perspectives on the issue: Dr. Seth Kramer, Kenneth W. Gemmell Professor of Law at the University of Pennsylvania Law School; Moein Khawaja, Executive Director of the Philadelphia chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations, or CAIR; and Don Adams, co-founder of the Independence Hall Tea Party Association. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks.
What is your objection, Don?
Our objection isn't on constitutional grounds. Actually, I think everyone in America agrees with the concept of freedom of religion as first established by William Penn here in Pennsylvania. I think our objection is on the appropriateness of building the mosque at this particular location.
And we'll follow up on that in a moment. Moein, you obviously think this ought to be allowed.
Right. I think it's important to start with a set of facts. See, we've got Ground Zero right here. It's hallowed ground. It's sacred ground. Around Ground Zero is a neighborhood, downtown New York. In this neighborhood, there are Muslims. They live there. They work there. They go to restaurants there. They go for walks there. They go to the park there. They do everything there is to do in life. They've been in this neighborhood for many years now, and then they're being told they have to go somewhere else to worship.
You both are touching on the real world and sensibility issues, which I do want to spend a great deal of time on, but I don't want to leave Constitution and legal just yet, because it flows through all of that, even into some of those areas. Seth, you have any observations on this before we begin?
Well, if I can, when I talk to my students, I tell them they have to begin with the facts. And one set of facts are the ones that Moein talked about. The second set of facts that struck me when I started looking at this, I went to Google Maps. I tried to figure out what's in the area. And it turns out that there are 6 churches within 2.5 blocks of Ground Zero. There's St. Paul's Catholic Church, there's St. Peter's Church, there's a church by the river, there is the Glad Tidings Tabernacle, and I think you count the Christian Science reading room. So the question is whether the government or other individuals can prevent Muslims from establishing a prayer space and community center in the same place that you have these other areas.
And precedent to date would tell you what?
Well, I went back and there is nothing exactly on point. The closest I could find was a case from 1953 called Fowler versus Rhode Island. City of Patuxent, Rhode Island, had a rule that they limited who could speak in their parks. They allowed Catholics to hold Mass, they allowed Protestants to have services, but when Jehovah's Witnesses, who some people found offensive, sought to use the park, they were told, you may not use the park because that's offensive. This went to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court was unanimous in holding that the City of Patuxent had violated the Constitution.
So far, the legal hurdles in this have all been passed. The Landmark Preservation Commission in the Lower Manhattan area in New York City has approved changing this site to this multi-story center, and there is a challenge to that as to whether or not they operated in the right manner. There may be an addition to that brief filed that challenges on other grounds. Con Edison apparently owns half of this. We're talking about what is technically called 45 to 51 Park Place, 2.5 blocks from Ground Zero. So are you saying, Don, that anyone at this point that says for a legal reason or constitutional reason this should not be done, are you rejecting that? You're saying, forget that?
What I am saying is that this is not a constitutional issue or an issue of freedom of religion. Nobody disputes that. I think it's very clear that this ground is sacred ground because 3,000 Americans on September 11th lost their lives, and I think that it's very clear that the terrorists who perpetrated this act were Islamists, and it's kind of akin to a situation I think in Poland where a Catholic church had built a convent and erected crosses was on a site very close to concentration camps. I think this is not a constitutional issue, but an issue of appropriateness. The church redressed the issue. They removed it because they...
Does it matter who the imam is?
Does
it matter who the imam is?
I think it does matter who the imam is, but in this particular case it matters more because of the controversial remarks he has made.
Let's back up just a little bit on whether this is sacred ground. I mean, there are going to be other buildings put on the actual Ground Zero site in addition to the memorial area. Normally on sacred grounds, tall structures are not erected. There are people walking all around the site, not just tourists, but people who work in businesses, as Moein said. Do you have a difference of opinion on whether this is sacred ground?
Ground Zero itself is sacred ground, and they're treating it that way. They're building a memorial.
On a stretch of it, but not the entire site.
Not the entire thing. After Ground Zero, as I said, it's downtown New York. It's a neighborhood. Muslim Americans live there, and you know, there's a lot of us versus them.
So what is the footprint for the sacred ground? I mean, is it just where the World Trade Center towers and the buildings that fell are, or do you stretch it out to where every bit of debris possibly fell? Don, where do you draw the line?
Well, I think we listen to the families of the victims of that terrible attack on the United States. We're still fighting a war. We're in the middle of a war in Afghanistan over this very issue, and to do this at this particular point, I think, is insensitive on the part of the Islamic community. They claim that this is to reach out to Americans. Well, this is the wrong approach. As I mentioned, in Poland, the Catholic Church decided at the objections of the Jewish community.
But this is America, not Poland, and so dealing with American law, I have two questions for you, and perhaps you have great answers for them. But the first question has to do with, in this country, if a person is murdered or a crime is committed against them, and the family shows up in court, the person who was arrested is in court, sometimes a family member lashes out at that suspect, the guilty suspect, all right, the person who's convicted. The law stops them, and the law says, as much as your pain is, there are things you can't do. There are larger issues here. Why should not the United States look at this case and say, as much as there is pain on these victims, many of whom live in the Philadelphia region, the survivors of the victims, there is a larger issue here, and that larger issue is the right of any religion to build.
Look, even Harry Reid and Governor Patterson believe that the site should be moved further away from Ground Zero.
Muslim Americans are being removed from the tragedy. Keep in mind, I'm an American. I was born and raised here. The Muslims in New York were New Yorkers. We also got attacked. It's not an us versus them. We're all Americans. We were attacked. We were first responders. We were NYPD police officers. We were firefighters. We rushed in and treated the wounded. So it wasn't we came in on the planes. Absolutely not. We've been a part of America. We share that same pain. We're a part of that pain. And so
I want to ask you then, we have to take a break, about the imam, about the money, and about some other issues, including the legal constitutional. More on the Manhattan Mosque controversy in a moment on NBC10 Edition.
You're watching NBC10 at Issue.